The infamous dinner table scene from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is perhaps the most memorable, and arguably the most disturbing. It is a 10-minute-long torture scene in which the final girl, Sally, begs for her life and is ridiculed for her helplessness. It reveals a startling amount about the role of women in horror films, and will serve as a reference point for the remainder of this video. Again, the scene is one of psychological torture, filled with screaming, howling, and disturbing close-ups of Sally's pupil. This special attention to Sally's vulnerability is defined as the sadistic, voyeuristic look, a type of cinematic gaze that seeks to satiate the viewer's displeasure with female powerlessness by seeing the woman punished. Combined with the fetishistic, scopophilic look, which seeks to fetishize the female body in whole or part, it is no wonder why feminist film critics like Laura Mulvey have maintained that the cinematic gaze is undoubtedly masculine. But hold on, where is all of this coming from? How did I go from showing a Texas Chainsaw clip to making assumptions about the so-called male gaze? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is only the beginning. All this talk of cinematic gaze refers to the bigger problem of identification. There are two forms of identification: with the camera, that is, the cinematic gaze, and with the character of empathetic choice. Horror films are entirely dependent on the latter. Although the cinematic gaze is assumed to be the primary form of identification for films in general, horror is victim-identified and requires the viewer to be somewhat invested in its characters. What Carol J. Clover refers to as a system of sympathies is in fact a well-known attribute of the horror movie genre. Audiences enter the theater expecting certain types of characters, scenarios, and resolutions. They know who is good, who is bad. They know who will live, who will die, and in what order. This repetitive quality of the horror film is reminiscent of folklore. Just like folkloric tales seem to be variants of the same story, horror movies seem to be modified versions of earlier horror movies. Recall the many sequels to Friday the 13th. But the story is not the only predictable quality of the horror film. In the way of folklore, the functions of certain characters, the hero, the victim, and the monster, precede the characters themselves. The functions of the monster and the hero have always existed, and they have always tended to be male. Likewise, the function of the victim has always existed and has always tended to be female. Sometimes the reverse occurs, but female monsters or heroes tend to be masculine. Male victims tend to be feminine, or are at least shown in feminine postures at the moment of their death, sometimes combined with blatantly feminine screams. It is clear in this light that the victim function wants manifestation in a female. Carol J. Clover has written that sex in this universe, the horror universe, proceeds from gender and not the other way around. A figure does not cry and cower because she is a woman. She is a woman because she cries and cowers. Horror films seem to be informed by two accounts of sexual difference, men versus women. Still, there is something to be said about the girl hero, or the masculine female hero. There is a quality of slidingness in horror films in which women become like men, as in slasher films, and men become like women, as in possession films. The girl hero is of particular interest to me. Women in horror are not only victims, they are protagonists in the full sense of the word. They are both victims and heroes. Thus, the prominence of women in horror films is not only a result of horror's investment in the victim function, it is a sign of our changing gender roles, of a deeper change within the culture. Furthermore, the world of horror is one that recognizes that men and women are profoundly different, and that men are superior to women. But it is also one that allows for fluidity, or the condition of slidingness. But Sally is not a girl hero. Texas Chainsaw came out before the trend of the female victim hero, and helped set the standard for more fully developed manifestations of the final girl, which took shape for the first time in the form of Laurie Strode from the original Halloween. I chose Sally, and I chose this scene exactly because Sally is just a victim. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the dinner table scene. And there's definitely something to be said about the fact that she's a woman, about the fact that the person who suffers most is usually a woman. I chose Sally because she predates the girl hero. She, and in fact the entire film, helped define the slasher genre, and with it, redefine traditional ideas of sex and gender. Subsequent videos will cover films after the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, keeping these qualities of horror in mind. Qualities including the emergence of the girl hero and the fate, of course, of the final girl.